The grand hall of Tethys Prime sparkled with lights from 1,000 worlds. Delegates from across the Galactic Union gathered for the annual cultural exchange. A tradition meant to strengthen bonds between the many species that called the galaxy home. Among the crowd, a woman with deep purple skin and silver markings along her arms stood near the refreshment station. Her name was Lyra Vexthal, and she carried herself like someone who had never known defeat. Lyra wore her military uniform with pride. The medals on her chest told stories of battles won and lives saved. She was Zenthari, a species known throughout the Union for their warrior traditions. From birth, Zenthari children learned to fight, to honor their ancestors, and to never back down from a challenge. Lyra had excelled at all of it. At 32 cycles old, she commanded respect wherever she went. She found these cultural events tedious. Too much talking, not enough action. But her superior officers insisted that good soldiers needed to understand the cultures they protected. So here she stood, sipping a drink that tasted like flowers and metal, watching aliens dance to music that hurt her ears. Not a fan of the Diluvian Symphony? A quiet voice asked beside her. Lyra turned to see a human man holding 2 glasses. He was average height for his species, with brown hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of Earth's ancient forests. He wore simple civilian clothes. Neat, but unremarkable. His smile was gentle, almost apologetic. "It sounds like someone is torturing a plasma coil," Lyra said bluntly. The human laughed, a soft sound that somehow cut through the noise around them. "I'm Daniel. Daniel Carter. I work in the archives. Historical Records Division. Lyra Vexthal. Union Defense Fleet." She accepted the glass he offered. "An archivist? That must be boring work." "Some people find peace in boring," Daniel said. He looked out at the crowd with an expression Lyra couldn't quite read. "There's value in quiet things. Old documents. Forgotten stories. The truth. Hidden in dusty files." Most people would have been offended by Lyra's comment. But Daniel seemed genuinely unbothered. This intrigued her. Zenthari culture was built on direct confrontation. People either challenged you or feared you. This human did neither. "What brings a warrior to a party for diplomats?" Daniel asked. "Orders," Lyra said. "What brings an archivist?" "Curiosity. These events are living history. In 50 years, someone will read about this night in the files I maintain. I like to see history as it happens, not just after it's been written down and sanitized." They talked for an hour, then 2. Daniel asked questions about Zenthari culture that no one had asked Lyra before. Not about weapons or battle tactics, but about their poetry, their family structures, what they valued beyond combat. In turn, Lyra learned that Daniel had lived on Tethys Prime for 7 years. Before that, he'd worked for Earth's government in some capacity he didn't elaborate on. He lived alone, enjoyed cooking, and spent his free time reading ancient texts from extinct civilizations. "Why study dead cultures?" Lyra asked. Daniel's expression turned thoughtful. "Because they have lessons for the living. Every civilization that fell made mistakes. Every species that went extinct ignored warning signs. If we study them carefully, maybe we can avoid their fate." Something about the way he said it made Lyra think he wasn't just talking about ancient history. Over the following months, they met regularly. Lyra would return from patrol missions and find messages from Daniel waiting. Simple things. A funny observation about a document he'd translated. A question about some tactical decision from a war centuries past. An invitation to try a new restaurant that served authentic human food. Their first real date was at a small cafe overlooking the crystal gardens of Tethys Prime. Daniel arrived early, and Lyra found him reading on a datapad. He stood when he saw her, that same gentle smile on his face. "You're always reading," Lyra observed as they sat. "Books don't judge you for your past," Daniel said quietly. Then, as if realizing he'd revealed too much, he added, And they're cheaper than therapy. Lyra laughed. She found herself laughing often around Daniel. Her warrior friends couldn't understand it. Why waste time with a human archivist who'd never held a weapon? Where was the honor in courting someone so ordinary? But Daniel wasn't ordinary. Lyra began to notice small things. The way he moved through crowds, without ever bumping into anyone. As if he calculated every step. How his eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, noting exits and potential threats. The scars on his hands that he never explained. The nightmares he tried to hide when they eventually spent nights together. Once, Lyra caught him standing on his apartment balcony at 3 a.m, staring at the stars with an expression of deep sadness. "Can't sleep?" she asked, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "Old memories," Daniel said. "They're quieter here than they were on Earth. But they never really leave." 2. "What kind of memories?" "The kind that make you appreciate peace." He never elaborated, and Lyra didn't push. Everyone had secrets. Everyone had a past they didn't want to discuss. She respected that. 2 years after they met, Daniel proposed. It wasn't a grand gesture. They were sitting in his apartment, eating dinner he'd cooked, when he simply said, "I know Zenthari marriage customs are different from human ones, but would you consider binding your life to mine, in whatever way feels right to you?" Lyra's family was skeptical when she announced the engagement. Her father, a decorated general, couldn't understand why his daughter would choose a human clerk over a proper Zenthari warrior. Her mother worried that Lyra was throwing away her culture for a novelty, but at the wedding, watching Daniel stand before her in traditional Zenthari ceremonial robes, speaking the ancient vows in her language with perfect pronunciation, Lyra knew she'd made the right choice. This quiet human who catalogued history and cooked elaborate meals and asked questions no one else thought to ask. He was her choice. And she was his. The ceremony was small. A few of Lyra's military friends attended, along with some colleagues from Daniel's archive. No one from Earth came for Daniel. When Lyra asked about it, he said simply, "I left that life behind. This is my life now. You are my life now." They settled into comfortable routines. Lyra took missions that kept her close to Tethys Prime. Daniel continued his quiet work among the dusty files and ancient texts. They cooked together, explored the city together, built a life together. In the evenings, they would sit on their balcony, watching the ships come and go from the orbital platforms above. Daniel would rest his head on Lyra's shoulder, and she would run her fingers through his hair. "Do you miss it?" Lyra asked one night. "Earth? I miss what Earth could have been," Daniel said. "But I don't miss what it was when I left. Will you tell me about it someday?" "Maybe," Daniel said. "When the past feels farther away." Lyra noticed a locked case in their storage room once, covered in dust. It was old, military grade, with a biometric lock keyed to Daniel's handprint. When she asked about it, Daniel's expression shifted for just a moment. Something cold and hard flickered behind his eyes, then disappeared. "Just old things from Earth," he said. "Nothing important anymore." She believed him because she wanted to. Because the life they'd built was good and peaceful and warm. Because the idea that her gentle husband might be hiding something significant seemed impossible. But late at night, when she couldn't sleep, Lyra would sometimes watch Daniel. Even in rest, there was something about him, a controlled stillness that reminded her of the way predators slept, ready to wake at the slightest sound, prepared for threats that no longer existed. She told herself she was imagining things. Daniel was an archivist, a man who spent his days reading and filing and preserving knowledge. Whatever he'd been before, whatever memories haunted him, they were in the past. The present was all that mattered. The present was safe. The first attacks came without warning. 3 colony worlds on the Union's outer rim went silent in a single night. When scout ships arrived to investigate, they found nothing but ruins. Cities reduced to ash. Orbital stations torn apart. Millions dead. The Galactic Union had enjoyed peace for nearly 2 centuries. Wars were rare. small conflicts between minor factions that the defense fleet quickly resolved. But this was different. This was systematic destruction on a scale no one had seen in living memory. Lyra stood in the briefing room of the Starfire, her assigned vessel, watching the tactical display with growing dread. Her commander, General Korath, was a four-armed Draken with deep red scales and eyes like molten gold. He gestured at the holographic map with two of his hands, while the other two clasped behind his back. "The Krell Dominion," Korath said, his voice like gravel grinding together. "They come from beyond the outer veil, from a region we'd marked as uninhabited. Our intelligence was wrong. Very wrong." The display showed sensor data from the few survivors who'd escaped the attacks. The Krell ships were massive, angular things, covered in armor plating, that shrugged off standard weapons fire. Their ground troops stood 3 meters tall, with exoskeletons that enhanced their already considerable strength. Early engagements had been massacres. Union forces, trained for peacekeeping and minor skirmishes, were unprepared for an enemy this brutal. "Our fleet is being redeployed," Korath continued. "The Starfire will join the defensive line at Sector 7. We hold there, or the Krell push into core Union territory. Failure is not an option." The officers saluted and dispersed to their stations. Lyra remained, studying the tactical data. She'd fought pirates and smugglers, even led a raid against a rebel faction once. But this was war, real war, the kind her ancestors sang about in their ancient epics. "Commander Vex Thal," Korath called. "A word." She approached, standing at attention. Korath regarded her with those burning eyes. "Your service record is exemplary, but records are made in peacetime. War tests differently. Your people value honor in combat. The Krell value only victory. Remember that difference. It may save your life." "Yes, sir." That night, Lyra called Daniel from her quarters. The connection was delayed by several seconds due to the distance, but his face appeared on her screen, warm and familiar. He was in their kitchen, cooking something that steamed in a pan behind him. "You're deploying?" Daniel said. "Not a question. Tomorrow morning. Sector 7. The outer defense line." Daniel nodded slowly. He turned off the stove and sat down, giving her his full attention. Even across light years of space, Lyra felt the comfort of his presence. "I won't tell you to be safe," Daniel said. "I know you're good at what you do. Just remember that surviving is more important than winning." "That's not very Zenthari of you," Lyra tried to joke, but her voice cracked slightly. "No," Daniel agreed. "It's very human. We know the cost of victory. Sometimes, the price is too high." They talked for an hour about nothing important. The tree that was blooming in their building's courtyard. The new restaurant that opened down the street. The book Daniel was reading about pre-spaceflight civilizations. Normal things. Peaceful things. A reminder of what Lyra was fighting to protect. Before they disconnected, Daniel said something that stuck with her. "War changes people, Lyra. Sometimes it's the quiet ones you need to worry about. They've already been changed. They know what's coming." Lyra wanted to ask what he meant, but the connection timer was expiring. They exchanged quiet goodbyes, and the screen went dark. The deployment was everything Lyra expected and worse. The Krell attacked in waves, their ships hammering Union defensive positions with weapons that burned through shields like paper. The Starfire held its position, but barely. Casualties mounted, ships were lost. Planets were evacuated as the Krell advance continued. Lyra distinguished herself in battle. Her tactical decisions saved countless lives, and her personal courage inspired her crew. But every night, she watched the casualty reports and felt the weight of command crushing down on her. She called Daniel when she could. The conversations grew shorter as communications became more difficult, but she treasured every moment. "How do you deal with it?" she asked him one night, exhausted after a 14-hour shift. "Knowing people died because of your choices." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight she'd never heard before. You remember them. Every single one. You carry them with you. And you make sure their deaths meant something. That's all you can do. You talk like you know. Everyone who lives long enough knows loss, Lyra. But there was something in his eyes. Something dark and distant. Lyra wanted to push. To ask the questions she'd been avoiding for 3 years. What had Daniel done for Earth's government? Why did he sometimes wake up screaming? What was in that locked case in their storage room? The connection flickered and died before she could ask. Weeks turned into months. The Krell pressed forward, and the Union lines bent, but didn't break. Reinforcements arrived from the core worlds. New tactics were developed. Slowly, desperately, the Union adapted to fighting a real war. Lyra returned to Tethys Prime for a brief leave. She found their apartment exactly as she'd left it. Daniel kept everything pristine, maintained their garden, even kept fresh flowers in the vase she liked. He was exactly as she remembered. Gentle, quiet, safe. They spent 3 days together. On the second day, Lyra needed to retrieve some old files from storage. She opened the storage room door and stopped. The locked case was sitting on a table, no longer covered in dust. It looked like it had been recently cleaned. Daniel, she called. He appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of tea. His expression was calm, but Lyra noticed his eyes flick to the case and then quickly away. Looking for something? He asked. Just some old mission reports. Daniel, what's in that case? I told you. Old things from Earth. Can I see? Why? The question wasn't defensive. It was genuinely curious. As if Daniel wanted to understand her motivation. Because we're married. Because you wake up screaming sometimes and won't tell me why. Because there's a part of your life you've locked away. And I want to understand. 2. Daniel set down the tea and approached the case. His hand hovered over the biometric lock. For a moment, Lyra thought he would open it. Then he lowered his hand. Not yet, he said softly. I'm not ready to show you that person. The man who owned these things. I'm afraid if you see him, you won't love the me I've become. Lyra touched his face gently. I love who you are. All of who you are. Even the parts you're afraid of. I hope you still feel that way when the time comes. The leave ended too quickly. Lyra returned to the Starfire and the grinding warfare of the frontier. But something had changed. She started paying attention to the war reports differently. Looking for patterns. Trying to understand the enemy. In one briefing, General Korath mentioned that the Union was desperately searching for military consultants with experience in asymmetric warfare. Species that had fought grinding conflicts before joining the Union. What about humans? Someone asked. Didn't Earth have significant wars before unification? Korath's expression darkened. Earth's unification wars are classified at the highest levels. What little we know suggests a level of brutality neither side wants remembered. The humans who fought in those conflicts either died or disappeared afterward. Lyra felt something cold settle in her stomach. That night, she did something she'd never done before. She accessed classified military databases using her command codes. She searched for information about Earth's unification wars. Most files were sealed, but she found fragments. References to special operations units. Mention of a soldier called the Blade, who'd ended a 3-year siege in a single night. The files didn't include names. Everything was redacted. But one report mentioned that after the wars ended, many of Earth's most effective soldiers had been quietly relocated, given new identities, allowed to start over, far from the planet they'd nearly destroyed saving. Lyra closed the files. Her hands were shaking. The next communication with Daniel was scheduled for the following day. When his face appeared on screen, Lyra studied him carefully, looking for signs, for evidence, for anything that would confirm or deny the growing suspicion in her mind. You seem troubled, Daniel said. Long day. We lost another ship yesterday. I'm sorry. Daniel, if I asked you something about your past, Would you answer honestly? He was quiet for a long moment. I've never lied to you, Lyra. But there are truths I haven't shared. If you ask me directly, I'll answer. But think carefully about whether you want to know. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed again. Lyra opened her mouth to ask. To demand the truth. To finally understand who she'd married. Then the alarm klaxons blared. Red lights flooded the bridge. Someone shouted about incoming Krell ships. Far more than expected. The connection cut as the Starfire went to battle stations, and Lyra's question remained unasked. The Krell broke through the defense line at Sector 7 like a hammer through glass. Their new strategy was brutal in its simplicity. They'd gathered their forces for one massive push, overwhelming Union ships through sheer numbers and firepower. The Starfire survived, but barely. Half the defensive fleet was destroyed or disabled, and then the Krell did something no one expected. They bypassed the remaining military targets and headed straight for Tethys Prime. Lyra watched in horror as the tactical display showed Krell ships entering the home system. The capital world's orbital defenses engaged, but they were designed to deter pirates. Not a full invasion force. Evacuation orders went out immediately. Civilian transports began lifting off, racing to get refugees to safety. Before the Krell landed, the Starfire and what remained of the fleet turned back, engines straining to reach Tethys Prime in time. But they were hours away. Hours that thousands of civilians didn't have. Daniel stood in the queue for evacuation transport number 73, surrounded by panicking aliens of a dozen different species. Children cried. Parents clutched travel bags filled with whatever they'd managed to grab. Above, the sky lit up with weapons fire as Krell ships engaged the orbital platforms. He was calm. While everyone around him pushed and shoved, Daniel stood still, a small bag on his shoulder. Inside was the locked case from his storage room. He'd carried it with him when the evacuation orders came. Not his and Lyra's photo albums. Not the keepsakes from their wedding. Just the case. The transport filled quickly. Daniel helped an elderly Corvian woman up the ramp, her arthritis making the steep steps difficult. He found seats for a family of Tellurians, their children exhausted from running. He was the last one aboard. The transport lifted off just as the first Krell troops landed in the distance. Daniel watched through a viewport as dropships disgorged massive armored soldiers. They were 3 meters tall, with thick plating covering their bodies and weapons that crackled with energy. They moved through the city streets like apex predators that had never known defeat. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, shaking slightly. We're heading to the northern spaceport. Stay calm. We'll get everyone to safety. But 10 minutes into the flight, proximity alarms shrieked. A Krell fighter had spotted them. The pilot tried to evade, but civilian transports weren't built for combat maneuvers. The shot hit their port engine, and the transport lurched violently. Emergency landing! The pilot shouted. Brace for impact! The transport came down hard in a public park 3 kilometers from the spaceport. The landing gear collapsed on impact, and the hull scraped across grass and stone before finally stopping. Remarkably, no one died. But the transport was destroyed, and they were on foot, in a city under invasion. Daniel helped people out of the wreckage. His hands were steady, his voice calm. Everyone stay together. The spaceport is northeast. We move quickly but carefully. Watch for Krell patrols. A Draken merchant, his scales cut and bleeding, glared at Daniel. Who made you? Leader. Human. Someone has to be. Daniel said simply. If you have a better plan, I'll follow you. The Draken had no plan. No one did. They fell in behind Daniel as he led them through the winding streets of Tethys Prime. They'd made it 6 blocks when the Krell found them. The patrol consisted of 8 soldiers, each one a walking fortress. Their leader, wearing slightly more ornate armor, stepped forward. When he spoke, a translator device rendered his words in galactic common. Refugees. How pathetic. The Union sends civilians to fight, while their soldiers run away. Daniel stepped in front of the group. These people are non-combatants. Let them pass. The Krell leader laughed, a harsh barking sound. The human speaks. How amusing. Your species is new to the galaxy. Weak. Fragile. You know nothing of real war. I know enough, Daniel said quietly. Then, you know you're about to die. The Krell raised his weapon, aiming at a young Tellurian girl clutching her mother's hand. The mother screamed. People scattered. But Daniel didn't move. He set down his bag, opened it, and drew out a sword. It was an ancient weapon by galactic standards. Roughly a meter long, slightly curved, the blade showing signs of careful maintenance and extensive use. No energy field. No plasma edge, just steel and a worn leather grip. The Krell stared at it, then burst out laughing. All 8 of them, howling at the absurdity. A human facing modern soldiers with an antique blade. This is what the Union has become? The leader said between laughs. So desperate they send civilians with museum pieces? Last chance, Daniel said. Let them go. Kill him. The leader ordered casually. The first Krell soldier raised his energy rifle. Daniel moved. One moment he was standing still. The next, he was somehow behind the soldier, his blade passing through a gap in the armor plating at the neck joint. The Krell fell, dead, before he understood what happened. The laughter stopped. Daniel moved like water, flowing around attacks that should have hit him. His blade found every weakness in Krell armor. Joints, seals, sensor arrays. He didn't fight the way Lyra fought, with strength and directness. He fought like someone who'd studied violence until it became mathematics. Efficient. Precise. Inevitable. A Krell tried to grab him. Daniel stepped inside the grab, struck twice, and the soldier's armor cracked, his ribs broken. Another fired his weapon. Daniel was already moving, the energy bolt missing by centimeters. His blade flashed, and the Krell's weapon sparked and died, severed in half. The entire fight lasted 90 seconds. 7 Krell lay on the ground, dead or disabled. The leader stood alone, his weapon aimed shakily at Daniel. But his hands trembled. For the first time in his military career, the Krell officer felt fear. Who are you? He whispered. Someone who wanted to be forgotten, Daniel said. He moved faster than the eye could follow. The Krell's weapon clattered to the ground. The leader fell to his knees, his armor sliced open, his chest heaving. Go, Daniel said. Tell your commanders that if they hurt these people, I'll come for them. All of them. And they'll learn why Earth tried to forget soldiers like me. The Krell officer ran, limping, injured, terrified. Daniel turned back to the refugees. They stared at him with wide eyes, some in awe, some in fear. The elderly Corvian woman he'd helped onto the transport spoke first. That was extraordinary, young man. Where did you learn to fight like that? In a war we don't talk about anymore, Daniel said. He cleaned his blade on a piece of cloth, sheathed it, and shouldered his bag. We should keep moving. There'll be more patrols. They reached the spaceport without further incident. Daniel stayed at the back of the group, watchful, ready. He got everyone onto a transport, headed for the emergency refugee stations orbiting the planet's moon. As the transport prepared to depart, the pilot recognized him. You're the one from the park fight. Someone recorded it on their comm device. It's all over the military channels. Sir, who are you? No one important, Daniel said. But he was wrong. The footage had already spread. Union command centers were analyzing it. Officers were comparing fighting techniques to classified databases. And slowly, impossibly, a name began to circulate. A name from Earth's darkest period. A name that had been deliberately erased from official records. The Blade. General Korath watched the footage for the 5th time in his office. His 4 hands were clenched into fists. Finally, he opened a communication channel to the Starfire, which was still an hour from reaching Tethys Prime. "Commander Vex Thal," he said when Lyra's face appeared. "I need to ask you about your husband. His full name is Daniel Carter, correct?" "Yes, sir." "Why? Before he was Daniel Carter, did he ever mention another name? A call sign? Or title?" "No, sir. He rarely speaks about his past." Korath was quiet for a moment. Then he transferred the footage to her display. This was recorded 30 minutes ago, in Tethys Prime's Eastern District. Lyra watched. Her hands gripped the armrests of her command chair so tightly the metal bent. She watched her quiet husband, her gentle archivist, move through trained killers like death itself. She watched him fight with a skill that shouldn't exist, shouldn't be possible. She watched him, and finally understood all the signs she'd seen, but ignored. "During Earth's unification wars," Korath said quietly, "there were rumors of special operations soldiers. Enhanced through training so brutal, most candidates died. They were deployed when conventional forces failed. One of them became legendary. They called him the Blade. He ended the siege of New Sol in a single night, walked into an enemy command center alone and emerged with their general's unconditional surrender. After the wars ended, Earth's government made him and others like him disappear. New identities, new lives, far from Earth." Lyra couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "Commander," Korath continued, "your husband is the most dangerous human alive. Perhaps the most dangerous soldier in the galaxy. And right now, he's on a planet being invaded by an enemy that doesn't know what they've awakened." On the surface, Daniel sat in the refugee camp, surrounded by people he'd saved. His sword lay beside him, still sheathed. He stared at the sky, at the ships battling overhead, and for the first time in 7 years, he felt the weight of his old life settling back onto his shoulders. He'd tried to leave it behind, tried to be someone else, someone better, but war had found him anyway, and the galaxy was about to remember why Earth's soldiers were the ones even Earth wanted to forget. The refugee camp was chaos. 15,000 beings from dozens of species crowded into temporary shelters designed for 5,000. Medical supplies ran low. Food was rationed. Children cried. Adults argued about who deserved what little resources remained. And overhead, the battle for Tethys Prime continued. The sky lit with weapons, fire, and burning debris. Daniel sat alone in a corner of the main shelter, his back against a wall. His sword rested across his lap. People gave him space. Word had spread about what he'd done. Some looked at him with gratitude, others with fear, most with confusion. How had a quiet human archivist become this? He didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw faces. Not the Krell he'd killed today. Those were fresh, not yet permanent. No, he saw older faces, humans. The people he'd killed during Earth's unification wars. The ones who haunted him across light years and 7 years of trying to forget. The Krell High Command learned about the fight quickly. Video footage reached their flagship within the hour. Warlord Crexus, Supreme Commander of the Invasion Force, watched it 3 times. Then he summoned his advisors. "This human," Crexus said, his voice like grinding stone. "Find out everything about him." What they discovered disturbed them. Not because Daniel was enhanced or augmented. He wasn't. The medical scans they pulled from Union databases showed an ordinary human. No cybernetics. No genetic modifications. Just a man in his late 30s with some old scars. What disturbed them was the absence of information. Before 7 years ago, Daniel Carter didn't exist. The identity appeared fully formed, complete with false work history and fabricated records. Someone with considerable resources had created this cover identity. And the only organization on Earth with those resources was the military. "He's a ghost," one advisor said. "One of their special operations soldiers." The ones they used when conventional warfare failed. Crexus studied the footage again. The way Daniel moved. The economy of motion. The complete absence of wasted energy. This wasn't just training. This was art. And art took time to perfect. How many humans like this exist? Crexus asked. Unknown. Earth's government classified everything about the unification wars. But intelligence suggests there were fewer than 200 of these soldiers. Most died during the conflict. The survivors were given new identities and scattered across Union space. And we found one by accident, Crexus mused. This changes things. The Krell had expected easy conquest. The Union species were soft, made weak by centuries of peace. But if humans could produce soldiers like this, even in small numbers, the war calculation changed. The Krell valued strength above all else. They understood superior warriors when they saw them. Crexus made his decision. Issue a challenge. Single combat. This human against me. If he wins, we withdraw from Tethys Prime. If I win, the planet surrenders immediately, his advisors protested. Warlords didn't fight one-on-one duels. They commanded from safety, directing forces strategically. But Crexus silenced them with a gesture. The Union needs to see that even their best is inferior to Krell's strength. And I want to face this warrior myself. I want to understand what makes a human dangerous. The challenge was broadcast to all Union channels. Within minutes, it reached the refugee camp. Daniel heard the message on a public screen, surrounded by hundreds of anxious refugees. Crexus's translated words echoed through the shelter. Human warrior called the Blade. I am Warlord Crexus, Supreme Commander of the Krell invasion. I challenge you to single combat. You against me. If you win, my forces withdraw from this world. If you refuse, or if you lose, we begin executing prisoners. 1,000 per day until you accept. You have 12 hours to decide. The shelter erupted in noise. People shouting. Some begging Daniel to accept. Others telling him to refuse. That it was obviously a trap. The volume grew until Daniel stood. And somehow, his quiet presence silenced the crowd. I need time to think, he said simply, and walked outside. The Starfire arrived at Tethys Prime 3 hours after the challenge was issued. Lyra barely waited for docking clearance before sprinting through corridors toward the refugee camp. Other officers called after her, but she ignored them. She had to see Daniel. Had to understand. Had to make sense of the last 6 hours that had destroyed everything she thought she knew about her husband. She found him sitting on a bench outside the main shelter, staring at nothing. His sword lay beside him. He looked tired in a way she'd never seen before. Not physically tired. Soul tired. Like a man carrying a weight no one else could see. Daniel, Lyra said softly. He looked up. For just a moment, his face showed relief and joy at seeing her. Then, it settled back into that exhausted expression. I saw the footage, Lyra said, sitting beside him. All of it. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Were you ever going to tell me? Daniel was quiet for a long time. I don't know. I wanted to be someone new. Someone better. I thought if I left that life behind completely, it would stop being real. Childish. I know. The past doesn't stop existing just because you ignore it. The Blade, Lyra said. That was you. During Earth's wars. That was a person I used to be. A weapon the government created when things got desperate. They took young soldiers, mostly volunteers, and trained us in ways that broke most people. The ones who survived became very good at killing. Too good. How many? How many did I kill? Daniel's voice was flat, emotionless, a tone Lyra had never heard from him. I stopped counting after the first year. Hundreds. Certainly. Maybe more than 1,000. Soldiers. Commanders. Sometimes civilians who got in the way. I told myself it was necessary. That I was saving lives by ending the war faster. And maybe I was. But that doesn't make the faces go away. Lyra took his hand. It was shaking slightly. Why did you stop? Because I started to enjoy it. Daniel's voice cracked. That's what terrified me. It started feeling natural. Easy. I would walk into a situation that should have killed me and walk out covered in other people's blood. And I felt nothing. Just satisfaction at a job well done. So when Earth offered me a way out, a new identity far from the planet I'd nearly destroyed saving, I took it. Won. And you came here, became an archivist, married me. I came here to learn how to be human again, to remember that life is about more than survival and victory. You helped me do that, Lyra. These past 3 years, living with you, I started to believe I could be someone else. Someone who builds things instead of destroying them. But now the war found you anyway. It always does. Daniel said. I ran across half the galaxy, and here it is again. Except this time, I have something to lose. Before, I had nothing. No attachments. No one who'd miss me if I died. But now, there's you. Our life. The future we planned. And I have to decide if I'm willing to risk it all for people I barely know. Lyra understood what he was really asking. The challenge from Crexus. If I refuse, they kill 1,000 prisoners every day. Civilians. Families. People like the ones I saved earlier. But if I accept, I go back to being what I was. The blade. The weapon. And I don't know if I can come back from that a second time. You're not alone this time, Lyra said firmly. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. Not because you're a weapon or a warrior. Because you're the man who helped an elderly woman onto a transport. Who saved children without hesitation. Who tried to leave violence behind even though it cost you everything. That's the Daniel I married. That's the person you chose to become. Daniel pulled her close. And for a moment they just held each other while the sky burned above them and the future hung uncertain around them. What would the Daniel I married do? Lyra whispered. Not the soldier you were. The man you chose to become. Daniel was quiet. Then, slowly, he smiled. It was sad, but genuine. The man I chose to become would understand that running from the past doesn't erase it. That peace isn't the absence of violence. It's choosing to protect what matters. Even when the cost is high, then you know what you have to do. I've always known. I just needed to hear you say you'd still be there after. They sat together as the sun set over Tethys Prime. Around them, Union forces prepared for the worst. Refugees worried about tomorrow. The galaxy watched and waited. And Daniel Carter, who'd been the blade, began preparing to be that person one more time. Not because he wanted to. Not because it was easy. But because sometimes the only way to protect peace is to remember how to make war. In the morning, he would accept Crexus's challenge. Tonight, he planted a small tree in the refugee camp's courtyard. His hands, which had held weapons and ended lives, carefully packed soil around fragile roots. What are you doing? A young Tellurian child asked, watching curiously. Planting something, Daniel said. Because something should grow from all this. The child helped him water it. And as night fell over the broken city, Daniel sat with Lyra one more time, memorizing her face, her voice, everything about her, just in case he didn't come back from tomorrow. The Arena of Stars was ancient, built 1,000 years ago when the Union was young, and disputes were sometimes settled through ritual combat. It sat in the heart of Tethys Prime, a massive amphitheater carved from white stone that could hold 100,000 spectators. Today, it stood mostly empty, damaged by the Krell invasion, but still functional enough for what was about to happen. Billions watched from across the galaxy. Every screen, every display, every communication device tuned to the same feed. Human against Krell. Single combat. The fate of a world hanging in the balance. Daniel walked into the arena alone. He wore simple clothes, the same ones he'd worn the day before, No armor, no enhancements. Just a man in his late 30s with brown hair and green eyes, carrying a sword that was older than most of the species watching. The crowd's reaction was muted. How could this ordinary-looking human hope to match a Krell warlord? Crexus was 3 meters of muscle and armor, a veteran of 100 battles, commander of an invasion force that had crushed Union defenses. Daniel looked like someone who should be filing documents, not fighting for a planet's survival. Lyra sat in the command section with General Korath and other senior officers. Her hands gripped the armrests so hard the metal bent. She wanted to look away, but couldn't. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would determine not just Tethys Prime's fate, but the galaxy's understanding of humanity. Crexus entered from the opposite side. His armor was ceremonial, but functional, covered in markings that denoted rank and victories. He carried a massive energy blade in one hand and a plasma cannon in the other. The weapons hummed with power. Behind him, his honor guard watched from the Krell section of the stands. A neutral Galactic Union arbiter stood at the arena's edge, his voice amplified across the space and broadcast to countless worlds. The terms are witnessed and accepted. Single combat to first surrender or death. The fate of Tethys Prime hangs on this outcome. May the strongest prevail. He stepped back. The arena fell silent. Crexus activated his weapons. Energy crackled along his blade. The plasma cannon charged with a high-pitched whine. "Human," he called out. His voice translated for all to hear. "You are brave to face me, but bravery without power is meaningless. I will make your death quick. You have my respect for that much." Daniel didn't respond. He drew his sword slowly, the blade reflecting the arena lights. He took a stance that looked deceptively relaxed. Weight balanced. Sword held in both hands, at a slight angle. And then Crexus attacked. The warlord moved fast for his size, closing the distance in seconds. His energy blade came down in an overhead strike that would have split Daniel in half. But Daniel wasn't there. He'd moved sideways, not running. Just a simple step that took him exactly outside the strike's path by the smallest possible margin. Crexus's blade hit stone and carved a glowing furrow 3 meters long. Before he could recover, Daniel struck. Not at the armor. At the joints where plates met. His sword's edge found a gap and drew a line of blue blood. The cut was shallow, barely an injury. But it was first blood, and it sent a message. "You are not invincible." Crexus roared and fired his plasma cannon. The shot could have vaporized a small vehicle. Daniel was already moving, his body flowing around the attack like water around stone. The plasma burst hit the arena wall and exploded, sending chunks of debris flying. The fight became a dance. Crexus, powerful and heavily armed, pressed forward with overwhelming force. Daniel moved with minimal effort, each step placed precisely. Each movement achieving maximum effect with minimum motion. He didn't try to overpower the warlord. He didn't need to. He simply wasn't where the attacks landed. To the watching billions, it looked like Daniel was reading Crexus's mind. But Lyra understood what she was seeing. This wasn't precognition or enhanced reflexes. This was pattern recognition refined to an art form. Daniel had fought so many battles, studied so many fighting styles, that he could predict what came next just from watching his opponent's weight shift. 5 minutes into the fight, Crexus began to slow. His armor was powerful but heavy. His weapons drained energy. He was built for short, decisive battles, where overwhelming force quickly crushed opposition. But Daniel wasn't giving him that battle. Every strike missed, every shot found air, and all the while, that ancient blade found more gaps, more joints, more small cuts, that individually meant nothing but collectively were bleeding the warlord dry. "Stand still and fight," Crexus bellowed in frustration. "I am fighting," Daniel replied quietly. "You're just not used to opponents who survive long enough for you to notice." The crowd began to murmur. What they'd expected to be a quick execution was becoming something else entirely. The human wasn't just surviving, he was winning. Not through power or advanced technology, but through skill so refined it looked effortless. Crexus changed tactics. He stopped trying to hit Daniel and started destroying the arena itself. His plasma cannon fired in sweeping arcs, turning sections of floor into molten slag. His energy blade carved through support pillars. He was trying to limit Daniel's movement, to force him into a corner where he couldn't dodge. But Daniel adapted. He used the destroyed terrain to his advantage, jumping from broken stone to broken stone, using debris as cover, turning Crexus's destruction into obstacles that slowed the warlord more than they hindered Daniel. 15 minutes into the fight, Crexus's armor showed damage. The ceremonial plates were scarred and cracked from Daniel's precise strikes. Blue blood stained multiple joints. The warlord's breathing came heavy through his helmet's speakers. Daniel, meanwhile, had a cut on his cheek from flying debris, and his clothes were torn in places. But he moved as fluidly as when the fight started. If anything, he seemed to grow calmer as the battle progressed, falling into a state of perfect focus where thought and action were the same thing. How? Crexus demanded between heavy breaths. How does a species as weak as humanity produce warriors like you? We're not weak, Daniel said, his voice carrying across the silent arena. We're adaptable. You were born for war. We had to learn it. And when you have to learn something the hard way, when you have to earn every advantage through blood and pain and loss, you understand it differently. You don't take it for granted. The fight continued. But everyone watching began to realize something. This wasn't about who would win anymore. That outcome was becoming clear. This was about what came after, about what message this fight would send to the galaxy. Crexus made one final desperate charge, roaring his defiance, every weapon firing, his entire massive body committed to crushing this small human who dared challenge Krell's supremacy. Daniel waited until the last possible moment. Then he moved. Not away, toward. Inside the warlord's guard, where the massive weapons couldn't angle to strike, his sword flashed once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Each strike was perfectly placed. Each one disabled without killing. Crexus's energy blade sparked and died, circuits severed. His plasma cannon's power cell cracked, rendering it useless. The hydraulics in his armor's right leg gave out, and he crashed to one knee. Daniel's sword came to rest at Crexus's throat. The warlord froze. The arena was silent, except for his labored breathing. Yield, Daniel said softly. There's no shame in losing to a better warrior. Only in refusing to admit it. Kill me, Crexus said. I have lost. Death is the only honorable end. No, Daniel said. Death is easy. Living with defeat, learning from it, becoming better because of it. That's harder. That's what takes real strength. He stepped back, lowering his sword. I didn't draw this blade to shake your world, warlord. I drew it to save mine. There's a difference. One is about conquest. The other is about protection. If you truly value strength, then prove it by being strong enough to honor your word and withdraw. Crexus remained kneeling. Slowly, painfully, he removed his helmet. His face was that of a predator. All sharp angles and calculating eyes. Those eyes studied Daniel for a long moment. Then Crexus stood. He raised his voice so all could hear, broadcast across every channel. The human has defeated me in fair combat. I acknowledge his victory. The Krell will honor our agreement. We withdraw from Tethys Prime. The arena erupted. Cheers from Union supporters. Shocked silence from Krell observers. Amazement from the billions. Watching across the galaxy, Daniel sheathed his sword and turned to leave. But Crexus called out one more time. Human, what is your true name? Daniel looked back. I used to be called the Blade, but I'm trying to be Daniel Carter. Just a man who wants to live quietly with his wife. You will never be just anything, Crexus said. Today, You changed what the galaxy thinks about humanity. Your species will be respected now. And feared. I'd prefer respected, Daniel said. Fear makes enemies. Respect makes peace possible. He walked out of the arena. The crowd parted for him, some reaching out to touch him as he passed, others backing away in awe. He ignored all of it. His eyes searched the command section until he found Lyra. She met him at the arena entrance. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then Lyra pulled him into a fierce embrace. You did it, she whispered. We did it, Daniel corrected. I only found the strength to go back because I knew I had something worth coming back to. In the following days, the Krell kept their word. Their forces withdrew from Tethys Prime. Ships departed, occupation ended, prisoners were released. Warlord Crexus personally oversaw the withdrawal, and before his flagship left, he sent a message to Daniel. You taught me something, human. That true strength isn't just the power to destroy, but the wisdom to know when not to. Perhaps there is more to the galaxy than conquest. The Union celebrated. Daniel Carter became a name spoken with reverence and wonder. Earth's government reluctantly confirmed his identity, revealing fragments of his past to explain how a quiet archivist could become a legendary warrior. Other species began to look at humanity differently, not as weak newcomers, but as a species with hidden depths, dangerous when provoked, but seeking peace when possible. But Daniel wanted none of the attention. He declined medals, refused interviews, and politely rejected offers of military positions and teaching contracts. He simply wanted to go home. Lyra received a promotion to captain for her service during the war, which she accepted. But she made it clear that any future assignments needed to keep her close to Tethys Prime, close to home, close to the man she'd married. They returned to their apartment. Everything was exactly as they'd left it before the war. Their kitchen, their garden, their life waiting to be picked up and continued. That evening, they went to the refugee camp one final time. The tree Daniel had planted before the duel had survived the chaos. It was still small, still fragile, but its leaves were green and healthy. New growth emerging from conflict. They planted more trees around it. Other refugees joined in, and soon, a whole garden was taking shape in the camp's courtyard. Something living and growing. A reminder that creation could follow destruction. As they worked in the soil, Lyra watched Daniel's hands. The same hands that had held a sword with deadly precision now planted seeds with gentle care. Both expressions of who he was. Both equally true. Do you think you'll ever pick up your sword again? She asked. Daniel smiled. It was genuine, warm, the expression of the man she'd fallen in love with. Only if I must. And only to protect, never to conquer. That's the difference between a weapon and a warrior. A weapon has no choice. A warrior chooses. And what do you choose? This, Daniel said, gesturing to the garden. To the people working together. To the life they were rebuilding. Peace. Growth. A future that's about more than surviving. That's what I'll fight for. That's all I'll fight for. They finished planting as the sun set over Tethys Prime. The city still showed scars from the invasion, but repair efforts were underway. Life was returning to normal. Or at least, to a new normal where everyone understood that peace was precious because it could be lost. Daniel Carter, who'd been the blade, who'd shaken the galaxy with nothing but a sword and the will to protect what mattered, went home with his wife. They had dinner. They talked about ordinary things. They planned their future, and the galaxy watched from a distance. With new respect and understanding. Humanity was not to be underestimated. Not because they were warriors, but because they understood both the necessity and the cost of war. And they valued peace enough to become warriors again. When peace needed protecting, that night, Daniel put his sword back in its case and locked it. But he didn't hide it away anymore. Lyra knew about it now. Knew about all of him. And loved him not despite his past, but because of how hard he'd worked to move beyond it. She married a quiet human. And when he drew his sword, he'd shaken the world. But more importantly, when the fighting ended, he put the sword down again and chose to plant trees instead. That, in the end, was the most human thing of all.